Close your eyes for a moment. Feel salt on the breeze and the tremor of distant bronze shields. Tonight we set sail, not for the well-lit harbours of Zeus and Heracles, but for the quieter inlets where lesser-sung champions wait. Their names might not echo from every marble pedestal, yet their footprints lace the very grain of Greek myth. Kings who wove whole cities together with nothing but resolve, huntresses who outran the wind, princes who traded comfort for impossible vows, and wanderers whose cunning proved sharper than any spear. Across the next 2+ hours, we'll thread labyrinths, stalk boars through moonlit orchards, bargain with river gods, and outfox monsters born from humankind's oldest fears. Some of our travellers will chase glory and find tragedy. Others will shoulder grief and discover an unexpected kind of heroism. A few may even glimpse redemption in the shimmer between sea and sky. Though, as you'll hear, every triumph extracts its price in the coin of fate. Each story you're about to hear flows as a miniature epic, a full arc of origin, ordeal, and aftermath, told in richly painted detail so you can taste the campfire ash, hear the harpstring hum, and feel the jolt when bronze meets bone. I'll guide you chronologically through a loose sweep of the mythic age, but don't worry about memorizing family trees. Just let each tale pull you forward, the way a half-forgotten melody insists on its next note. And if this is your first voyage with us, welcome aboard. To everyone returning, your steady support is the wind in these sails. If the stories move you, please tap the like button and consider subscribing. It's a simple way to tell the algorithmic fates that long-form myth still matters, and to make sure you never miss the next chapter. But enough of that. Whether you're here for study, for bedtime immersion, or for company on a long commute, settle in. Find a comfortable chair, dim the lights, maybe slip on headphones if the world outside is noisy. The Aegean is dark, the oars are poised, and the first horizon is already lightening to a promise, or perhaps a warning. Breathe in. Exhale slowly. Our voyage through the hidden corridors of Greek legend begins now. Nestor. Last of 2 wars, first in wise counsel. Smoke from the palace hearths curled into the dawn above sandy Pylos, lifts of grey that smelled of pine tar and goat fat, and all the lingering chatter of a citadel that never fully slept. Nestor rose as he always had, long before sunrise, though in those days the face that met him in the bronze mirror was still smooth and bronze gold itself, not yet creased by decades, not yet toned to cedar by the wind of 2 wars. He padded barefoot across the cool mosaic floor, fish tiles glimmering under a lamp he kept low to save oil, and paused at the window. Beyond the balustrade, the Ionian Sea turned from purple to copper, and the first gulls scissored the sky. Somewhere on the beach, wickers creaked as fishermen levered skiffs to water. Inhale the drying kelp, exhale the night's last whispers. That had been his dawn ritual since boyhood, and it readied him not only for spear drills, but for thought. Most men remember Nestor as the hoary counselor of Troy's long siege, voice rough as pumice, yet sharper than any sword. Fewer recall that he began in reckless flame, a prince quick to laughter, quicker to duel, and certain that the axle of the world turned beneath his sandaled feet. Yet before youth had finished crowning itself, prophecy had brushed his brow and tragedy had bitten his heel, marking him for something sterner than simple valor. His first legend sprouted at a feast in honor of his father, Neleus. Warriors of Arcadia boasted of lions felled, of raiders whipped back into their oar seats. Nestor, still more thistle than oak, stood and declared he would ride to the centaur Eurytion's cave by Mount Pholoe and demand the creature surrender tribute. Wineskins or hide scrip, it scarcely mattered, so that Pyelos need never fear the monster's goat-footed raids. Even Neleus, fearless in most company, tugged his son's elbow, murmuring that centaurs stain their beards with the marrow of heroes, that courage must dress itself in judgment. Nestor misheard worry for doubt. He gathered his friends, oiled their chariot axles, and thundered north before second cups were poured. At Pholoe's foothills, moonlight glazed pines like spears dipped in silver. They tethered their mares in a hollow ring and climbed, blades naked in the cold. Nestor felt the mountain tremble with distant stomps, the rhythm of hooves that never learned to sneak. When the centaur appeared, its torso was columned muscle, its equine flank burling with scars. A shag of black mane rolled down shoulders, and eyes small as garnets gleamed with drunken glee. An empty amphora swung in one fist, every tilt sloshing out the dregs of stolen wine. Before Nestor or his friends decided whether to parley or thrust, the centaur's limb blurred outward, amphora smashing a boy's jaw to dust. Fury displaces strategy. Two Pylian youths rushed, spears sliding off the creature's rib barrel. Eurytion shrieked laughter, twisted one spear free, and snapped its ash shaft like biscuit. Nestor held 3 heartbeats, breathing through nose the way Castor had taught. Find the space between panic and charge. He flung his javelin lower than honor and higher than fear, straight into the hinge where centaur forelegs met human waist. The creature's laughter converted to a trumpeting grief so raw he felt pity even as he dodged a retaliatory swing of shattered amphora shards. It toppled, still alive enough to thrash pine trunks out of soil and make the earth cough dust around roots. At dawn they burned carcass and companions alike. 2 friends never rose. Ash drifted, carried downhill on draughts, as though a priest had botched libation. Nestor rode home, shield arm hanging numb from bruises, believing he had opened a new page of Pylian history. Instead, Neleus read his son a quiet lecture. That success untempered by foresight ravels kingdoms, that a funeral pyre is never lit by the dead alone. That night, Nestor cut 3 locks of hair, 1 for each companion, and buried them beneath his sleeping bolster, so memory pricked him every turning of the night. Yet the world kept needing young blades. The Caledonian boar had begun to plough Aetolia's orchards into smoking ruin, a tusked avalanche of hatred sent by Artemis slighted. Nestor answered Melega's call, joining a cohort of heroes whose names later brightened urns. Atalanta swift as north wind, Idas and Lynceus, whose eyes pierced caves, and more. The boar emerged on a scree slope, hide ridged like ploughed clay, teeth pale as exposed moon. Hunters formed a ragged half-circle. Arrows clattered off bristles so coarse they might have been bronze. Nestor pivoted side to side, calculating options, but Atalanta fired true into the creature's flank, and Melega finished it, leaving Nestor only a blood-speckled view and a lesson. Sometimes another's glory is the better ending. Seafaring beckoned next. The Argo's timbers smelled of pine resin and risk. Jason asked for skill with chariot and spear, but Nestor signed on for the sake of learning the tongue of waves. He suspected the sea held more tactics than any parchment. On that voyage, he stood bull watch beside Orpheus's midnight lyre songs, sparred with Polydeuces aboard deck until knuckles split, and marvelled when Hera bent to wind roots for mortal goals. At Colchis, the fleece glittered under dragon coil dreams. During their flight, when sirens' hymns tried to suction reason from skulls, Nestor stuffed beeswax in ears, seeing clearly that curiosity remains the oldest ambusher alive. Upon returning, he found his father embroiled in a feud with Heracles, sparked by petulance, fanned by suspicion. Heracles and allies stormed Pylos. Swineherds screamed that his arrows flew like angry sunbeams, too many to count, each crying ruin on targets. Nestor unrolled his father's chariot bandoliers, mobilized what forces he could, but the lion-cloaked demigod slaughtered 11 of Neleus's 12 sons. Nestor alone escaped, shield split, spirit cauterized by the howl that followed a father's fatal wound. Survivorship seared vanity from his pores. He rebuilt Pylos stone by stone, forging alliances with Messenia through labor, not dowry, helping raise granaries, redigging irrigation channels, packaging grain tribute in measure that let foreign stomachs learn the weight of Pylian mercy. Thus, by the time Helen's abduction rattled Achaea, Nestor wore grey at beard's edge, though eyes kept young storms. Agamemnon valued him not for spoiler-arm, though he still outthrew most youths, but for memory that could instruct armies how very quickly a proud house becomes an ash-rumour. At Aulis, he told Agamemnon that Iphigenia's death would score every later feast with silent places, but he also knew drought of wind would starve troops before they ever glimpsed Troy. An old prince cannot always afford the luxury of unbloodied hands. They sailed, they camped, they bled. At council tent flaps, whipped in salt gusts and insomnia, Nestor spoke calm geometry. Anchor flanks with ditches, bridle Achilles' pride with honor games. Let Ajax and Diomedes alternate night patrol. When younger kings rolled eyes at a voice older than some city walls, he told them of centaur breath and brothers butchered under Heracles' arrows. Silence swallowed sneers. Action followed counsel. But his age did not prevent him mounting chariot each dawn. Antilochus, his son sprung from second marriage, took reins, loving speed as dolphins love cresting. One crisp pre-dawn near the Scamander, Trojan cavalry hammered Greek watchfires. Nestor, trapped when a wheel hub split, might have perished had Antilochus not swung the team aside and hauled farther onto a second chariot. Later, Nestor placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, thumb feeling the quick thud of youthful artery, and realized that courage moves generationally, neither hoarded nor predicted. He prayed to Poseidon that Antilochus never taste the degree of loss droughting his own veins. When Patroclus fell, when Achilles roared his grief into throat-searing song, it was Nestor who spoke to the Myrmidon, convincing him of strategy rather than raw thunder. Lead the vanguard, yes, but know when to yield. Patroclus did not yield. Hector's spear pinned that hope. Still, the council had threaded its way into Achilles' rampage, which ended Hector and changed the tide of siege. Such is advice, to be taken, partly taken, or misunderstood, yet always to leave trace enough for future stones to find. Near the war's terminus, Antilochus's courage reached across a misjudged line, sacrificing himself to drag Nestor clear when Memnon's Cushite arrow spray descended like starfall at noon. The shaft, meant for the elder prince, pierced the younger. Antilochus crumpled, breath fleeing in bright coppery spurts. Nestor pressed trembling lips to his son's temple. He wanted to howl like Neleus had howled. He wanted to tear his own beard out by the fist. Yet the army needed one voice still able to thread sense through a cloth woven entirely of grief. He stood, wiping his hands on dust, crimson streaking grey palms, and ordered the line reformed before Memnon's chariots could trample morale. Achilles avenged the boy, but victory tasted of clay and saltless tears. When Troy fell, Nestor supervised embarkation, counting instead of burning, ensuring women captured as spoil were fed and not merely chained. He accepted no gold, only 2 amphorae of Trojan soil to scatter on Antilochus's future mound back home. The sea granted him relatively gentle passage, perhaps because even warring gods respect an elder who kept memory for them. Back in Pylos, Nestor walked rebuilt ramparts above fields now embroidered with victory poppies. He poured Trojan soil into a trench, planting laurel seeds that smelled of Ilios evenings. Villagers asked why a victor would root enemy earth in homeland. He answered that laurel burns sweet in winter fires, and memory burns sweeter still when mixed. No one harvests wisdom from single soil. Years folded into a cloak of calm labor. Visitors sought the king who had advised Achilles and Odysseus, and found instead a man teaching grandsons how to knot nets, lecturing them that sea knows no trophies, only truths measured in wave height and patience. In his final winters, he no longer rode chariots. He sat at hearth, telling stories while amber flames etched new lines across a face already engraved. Children crowded knees, fishermen crowded doorways. Kings sometimes knelt by the threshold listening. One moonless night, as tide hissed its cyclical lullaby, Nestor slipped away, breath fluttering once like a moth, then stilling. Pylos lit torches from beach to barley plain. They built a pyre of cedar and laurel, some branches from Troy's soil, and flame carried a fragrance both foreign and homegrown. Ash drifted over the Ionian, and some say dolphins leapt in that ash-flecked light, silhouette silvering spray, as though Poseidon sent an escort. Afterward, they placed a single stone on the hill overlooking both sea and centaur-haunted mountains. It bore no epitaph, only the carved relief of a hoplite shield beside a shepherd's crook, reminding passers that leadership grows from balance, war and counsel, spear and seed. Travelers who pause there hear wind push through grass, and sometimes imagine it shapes words. Remember, remember. What risk cost, what wisdom gained, and how perseverance, when tempered by remembrance, outlives the thunder of younger glory. The pyre's embers glowed 3 nights before rain finally smothered them, and when dawn broke over Pylos, the air tasted of cedar smoke memories and laurel resin that clung to the tongue like prayer. Villagers approached the ash mound in silence, each dropping a pebble until a low cairn formed where flame had swallowed their king. A shepherd lad placed a single lamb's wool tassel on top. A fisherman left a polished shell. A widowed potter pressed her calloused palm flat upon the warm stones and whispered that the quiet between waves would never feel empty again, because it now carried his breath. No herald proclaimed a new ruler. The city seemed content to be steered for a while by the lingering momentum of a man who had prepared his people to think before swinging any sword. Charis, Nestor's eldest daughter, summoned council only on market days, reviewing grain tallies, adjusting ferry levies, signing decrees with the stylus her father had once tucked behind his ear during audience hours. She kept his wax tablets stacked in plain reach, so advisors might thumb through the grooves of old calculations before proposing fresh taxes. In the great hall, she replaced spear racks with cedar cabinets that held scrolls copied from Thebes and Delphi, treatises on rainfall prediction, lunar cycles, even a fragment of Thalian geometry describing the perfect arc for irrigation channels. When messengers asked why forts trained less and scribes wrote more, Charis replied that Pylos's new walls would be made of foresight. Stone is only its scaffolding. Travellers began arriving with torches at dusk, pleading to see the cairn. They came from Elis, Arcadia, Ithaca, even windswept Lesbos. Each carried a question sown by rumour. What final guidance had Nestor given? Did he leave scrolls sealed for future wars? Charis met them at the base of the hill, offered figs and honeyed goat milk, then told them that her father's final counsel was already woven into their own curiosity. Ask, share, remember. Some left disappointed, expecting oracular riddles. Others lingered, building low benches around the cairn so wayfarers could sit and share lessons among themselves. Months later, a lean ship painted sea green docked under dusk. Its sail bore the entwined dolphin and bull emblem of Telemachus. The Ithacan prince, now fully bearded, stepped onto the pier clutching an eelskin scroll case. He ascended the hill alone, wind-rattling cedar seedlings that ringed the cairn. Kneeling, he unrolled the parchment. Notes he had made during last conversation with Nestor years earlier. Strategies for retelling hardships so that courage blossomed instead of scarring. He read them aloud, voice quavering. When he finished, he buried the scroll at the cairn's base, saying the lessons were too heavy to carry as personal plunder. Better they grow roots where their author slept. Not long after, Orestes arrived aboard a creaking galley, flying the sigil of the twin serpents, symbol of a dynasty he still found unsteady in his hands. He carried a bronze mixing bowl hammered at Mycenaean forges, its rim etched with a scene of a charioteer stopping at a crossroads. At the cairn, he poured unmixed wine until the bowl brimmed, then tipped it slowly, letting red arc across stones. "For every father I lost," he said, "your words lent me second courage." He spent the whole night reciting the legal reforms he had enacted with Nestor's encouragement. City gate courts, so travellers might plead grievances without crossing fortress threshold. Grain reserves managed by midwives so hunger could never coerce mothers' loyalties. Sunrise found him asleep against the cairn, empty bowl beside him, wine scent mingling with laurel. When he woke, stray dogs sat nearby, silent guardians. He scratched their ears and left without fanfare. The cairn began attracting objects stranger than shells or scrolls. A fragment of Trojan horse timber polished smooth, an Illyrian harp string, even a weathered centaur hoof. A hunter claimed it from Pholoe hills, swearing it belonged to Eurytion, felled by Nestor's spear decades before. Charis catalogued each, storing them in the cedar cabinets, arranging by geography rather than value, convinced her father would sooner trace trade routes than count trophies. She ordered an inscription carved along the hill's approach path, not lofty stele but waist level, so children might read it. It said only, "Balance memory with motion." When questioned by a Corinthian envoy, she explained that remembrance alone fossilizes, action alone forgets. Together, they let nations stride rather than stagger. Spring thaw melted inland snows, swelling rivers. A tributary south of Pylos burst its banks, threatening barley fields. Charis gathered elders in the rebuilt council hall and unfurled an atlas Nestor drafted after the Argonaut voyage. Coastlines measured by lunar timing, tributaries traced in soot. One frail fisherman pointed at a penciled note beside the very river. "Bedrock shallow, can be diverted north at half-league's turn." The council dispatched crews to dig a channel exactly where that margin scribble lay. Within days, water rejoined the Eurytas, crops survived, and farmers began leaving small pots of river silt at the cairn, believing the old king's foresight still flowed earthward through his grave into their plough furrows. Meanwhile, Charis's younger brother Pisistratus, restless for the pulse of broader roads, sailed to Elis to observe its charioteers. There he met a woman named Thoessa, famed for setting axle pins without need of hammer. They married beneath the temple of Poseidon Hippios, and for the wedding feast, Pisistratus recited stories of his father not as battlefield lion, but as the man who once saved an olive harvest by teaching orchardists to burn damp straw instead of dry, creating smoke that tricked frost into retreat. Elis, impressed, sent carpenters to Pylos, offering exchange of stable designs for lessons on frost smoke. Trade blossomed from that union. The first of many alliances sprung from storytelling rather than spear point. 25 winters after Nestor's passing, Pylos hosted a symposium on navigation safety. Captains gathered under a timber hall where rafters smelled of pitch and sea salt. They swapped wreck tales and star charts, debating the merits of new triangular lateen sails. At the hall centre stood a copy of the driftwood rudder Nestor once described in Aging, light, flexible, forgiving to sudden gusts. Pisistratus demonstrated its angle on a half-hull model, citing his father's habit of watching seabirds to determine weather before rigging. If gulls flew high, he'd loosen sail. If low, he'd reef. Captains scribbled notes, then joined a nighttime libation at the cairn, pouring a trickle of brine over stones to seal vow that every vessel passing Pylos would henceforth bear a small laurel sprig in its stern. A living compass to remind crews that even old wood can learn new wind. Elsewhere, poets spun Nestor into verses. In Lesbos, aging Sappho's disciples compared counsel to lyre tuning. Strings must neither slack nor snap. A Boeotian rhapsode exaggerated Nestor's centaur fight into a cosmic duel lasting 9 nights, but still ended on the moral that victory requires tempered grief. In these retellings, children no longer pictured a stern greybeard bending hearing toward younger heroes. They imagined an ageless voice bending time, stitching the Caledonian boar to Trojan ramparts across one breath. But the cairn itself remained humble. No marble statue replaced its rough stones. Charis argued against one when sculptors offered, insisting that polished likenesses distract pilgrims from listening to wind threads through laurel leaves, the true voice of her father's wisdom. Instead, she commissioned a low stone bench encircling the base, encouraging visitors to sit facing outward, not inward, so they might carry what they observed back to their own roads. Near Charis's 73rd name day, an envoy from Athens sought Pylian advice regarding a land allocation dispute. The envoy presented a golden bowl, but Charis waved it aside, quoting Nestor. No gold can weigh what shared bread already balances. She convened farmers, fishermen, shepherds, any citizen who carried callus or ink stain from honest work, and posed Athens's riddle. Debate lasted 7 hours. At dusk, they produced a parchment dividing cropland by river reach, rather than political precinct. The envoy marveled that such clarity arose from voices often ignored in marble capitals. Charis answered, "My father learned from centaurs, boars, and beeswax in ears. Why should we not learn from net menders and cheesemakers?" That winter took Charis quietly beside the hearth, while she copied final annotations into her father's atlas. Pisistratus, now grey-templed yet still quick-footed, oversaw her burial next to Nestor, adding a single olive wood tablet inscribed. She kept the maps updated. At the funeral feast, he passed around bowls of river silt mixed with foreign saffron, telling grandchildren to sprinkle a pinch whenever they crossed a new stream, so soil of memory mingled with soil of discovery. Pylos continued, grain shipments steady, harbours deepened for broader beam ships, scribes exporting rainfall prediction scrolls to islands once thought too remote to matter. Every seventh summer, they held a festival called Memnisteria. Events included spear throwing, but also a contest where elders told tales of mistakes their youth would call embarrassing. The loudest applause greeted those whose errors birthed the greatest learning. On the final night, children carrying laurel branches circled the cairn, singing a refrain that drifted far across the Ionian. Old winds teached new wings. Centuries later, when Roman travellers mapped Greek shores, they noted a humble stone mound outside modern Keraun. Local fishermen still left shells there explaining, through transliterated Doric, that it honoured a king who out-listened storms. Archaeologists would unearth charred laurel, a melted bronze mixing bowl, eel skin fragments, and conclude the site held layers of ritual deposit. What they couldn't catalogue was the wake of stories rippling out. How a centaur fight taught restraint, how a son's death taught resilience, how a single voice at councils of louder men shaped tides of decision for generations. In seafarers' taverns from Sicily to Rhodes, a proverb survived on cracked lips: "Make Nestor your helmsman when tempests crowd the mast." It meant, steady the ship with remembrance, but adjust the rudder with what you now see rising. And in certain winter gales, when cold swirls across the Ionian and laurel groves shiver, one might hear two layered sounds: the ghost of an ageless counsellor clearing his throat before speaking, and the echoing answer of towns, farms, and ships repeating that counsel in deeds rather than merely words. Each act of verse added to the endless epic of listening, learning, and living forward. Cadmus, earth-seeded king and the dragon's bride. When Europa vanished, lifted from the Tyrian surf on a bull's alabaster back, sails of foam billowing behind, her brother Cadmus felt the world tilt from prose into riddle. The palace courtyard held her wreath of violets crushed into fragrant ruin. Her sandals lay in mud, straps severed as if by teeth too delicate to tear flesh. Agenor, their father king, beat bronze shields for search parties and swore death to any man who returned without the girl. Yet oracles whispered her abductor was no man. Anguish turned to awe. Zeus had breached mortal household, leaving only myths for ransom. Cadmus, firstborn, donned iron-shod boots and a cloak dyed the bruised purple of regret. He swore to the trembling queen Telephassa that he would find Europa or never step in Tyre again. She, tearing a strand of hair, tied it round his wrist, binding him to home's memory. Then he mounted a Phoenician galley with rowers oiled for swift sea labour and set course after rumour, west toward Crete, north toward Thrace, wherever shepherds claimed to spy a white bull grazing dew on mountain slopes. Seas moaned beneath cedar hull. Days spooled into salt-skinned monotony, but at night Cadmus paced deck, mapping star grids into questions. He consulted charts, sacrificed thrushes, asked winds. Nothing traced Europa's path. After months he anchored at Delphi, where Pythian laurel shimmered in autumn haze. Inside the tripod chamber, the oracle's murmur floated through pitch blackness. Seek not the sister, seek the cow. Follow where she rests. There your city will rise. Speak twice to the serpent, and sow what it leaves. Cow, serpent. The riddles tangled like nets. Cadmus left Delphi with only pulse-driven certainty that the gods meant him far from Tyre. He sent his sailors home and trekked north, mother at his side. Telephassa refused to relinquish her children's sense to wander alone. Along Phocian streams they met a heifer whose hide glowed moon-pale even at noon. It grazed calmly, then lifted head and walked. Cadmus followed. So did Telephassa, breath shallow. When sun toppled behind Mount Cithaeron, the cow knelt in a valley where grasses shimmered like undulant bronze. Telephassa, exhausted, collapsed. Under a fig tree, she exhaled final hope and died, whispering Europa's name. Cadmus closed her eyes, burying queen and mother together beneath a cairn of smooth river stones. Night cicadas etched funeral hymns against the silence. The cow still knelt. Cadmus vowed to sacrifice it in thanks once a city rose upon this ground. First, he needed water for ritual. He dispatched companions to fetch it from the nearest spring. Old Ares guarded fount in the woods. Hours passed, none returned. Armed with a bronze sword sporting wave-like patterns, he traced their absence into cedar gloom. There, crimson-spattered moss, torn limbs protruded from fern. Coiled around a laurel trunk waited a dragon, scales blue-black, crest spine like war helm. Eyes glittered with malevolent intellect. Ares' pet, bound to guard the spring sacred to the god of slaughter. Cadmus's heart hammered, but training steadied blade. He hefted a boulder, wedged the dragon's jaws partly open, then stabbed bronze deep between ventral scales. Poisoned breath sizzled, scorching his arm. At last the beast convulsed, letting out a death rattle that dimmed nearby gnats, as though sound itself turned lethal. Cadmus severed the reptilian head, black ichor splashing his calves. Adrenaline tapered into awe. He recalled Delphi's last instruction. Sow what the serpent leaves. He stripped the dragon's jawbones and pried loose teeth, sharp as miniature spears. With shaking hands, he dug furrows in red soil and planted each tooth. Murky dust pulsed. Earth quivered. From each burial sprouted bronze-helmed warriors, fully grown, shields glistening with damp loam. Their eyes held blank hostility, like memories cast into flesh with no context but war. Cadmus froze, gripping sword. Yet memory of another oracle crumb surfaced. Speak twice to the serpent. He shouted, "Brothers, stop." No effect. He tried again. "Brothers, let each strike where shadows fall." Confused, they turned on one another, misreading shadow for foe. Clang of bronze on bronze rang until only 5 remained, panting, spears dripping ichor from kin. Cadmus spread hands. "We are blood now. Help me build." The warriors nodded. Names later told: Echion, Pelorus, Eudaeus, Chthonius, Hyperinor, the Spartoi sown men. Together they erected the first stake of what would become Thebes, 7-gated city named after Telephassa's nurse, or founded on the bovine omen. Sources differ. Cadmus sacrificed the cow on an altar to Athena, ashes drifting across new thresholds. The goddess, pleased, appeared in helm-bright vision, instructing him to quell Ares' wrath, lest slime of dragon blood curse future streets. For 8 harrowing years Cadmus served as penitent to the war god, marched in phantasmal battles across dreamscapes, shouldering spectral shields. When the debt cleared, Ares relented, and in a rare gesture offered his own daughter Harmonia as Cadmus's bride. Their wedding became legend. Hephaestus gifted a necklace of inlaid night sky, each gem a star. Apollo played lyre. Muses braided hymns into perfumed breeze. Even Dionysus, infant at the time, gurgled blessings. Human kings travelled leagues to witness mortal wedded to divinity's child. Cadmus beheld Harmonia, eyes the colour of dawn mist over battlefield remains, and felt purpose settle like armour. They would govern responsibly, raise walls tall enough to shelter prophecy and peasants alike. And so Thebes flourished. irrigation canals netting fields, trade caravans exchanging Tyrian purple for Boeotian wheat. Cadmus minted the first alphabetic script on clay tablets, a tribute to Phoenician roots, so market stalls rang with contracts rather than quarrels. He taught ironworkers crescent forging to craft ploughs, not just swords. His Spartoi captains policed roads, yet were haunted by memory of fratricide. In nightmares, they relived clawing free from soil amid screams of doomed seed brothers. But peace, like returned seabirds, perched lightly. Hera, spying the necklace gleaming at Harmonia's throat, envied mortal enchantment. She whispered suspicion into Theban sibyls. The jewel housed latent spellwork. Over decades, its malign ripples would transform blessings into tragedies. Already foreshocks trembled. Apollodorus, Cadmus's youngest, slipped on temple steps and shattered a thigh. Ino, beloved daughter, later married Athamas, whose mind Dionysus drove mad. Poor Semele would conceive a child by Zeus, only to be tricked into demanding her lover's true form. Fatal incandescence. Each misfortune traced threads back to that wedding feast, where gods mingled love with wrath. Cadmus, feeling blame coil like returning dragon, resolved to appease fate by relocating late in life. He abdicated to Pentheus, another doomed branch, and journeyed with aged Harmonia toward Illyria, seeking fresh ground unsalted by oracles. They brought minimal retinue, only Echion's grandson and a donkey whose bray comforted sleepless nights. Halfway through rough Dalmatian hills, brigands ambushed the company. Cadmus fought like a man whose youth had sprouted from war teeth. Blade parried, spear lunged. Yet odds towered. In desperation, he prayed to Ares for lion strength. Instead, as prophecy tangled with oversight, serpent scales sprouted along his forearms, the old dragon's legacy claiming flesh. Harmonia, running to aid him, felt her calves fuse, skin turning emerald. Brigands fled screaming as two serpents colossal as legends intertwined. Yet Cadmus's eyes, once bronze, still glimmered human sorrow. Harmonia's forked tongue brushed his fanged cheek. Together they slithered into an Illyrian pool, its still surface swallowing destiny. Locals later swore the pair re-emerged each spring when swallows returned, coiling upon a marble outcrop, tongues flicking dew. They brought omens, smooth-scaled if harvest would prosper, restless if war loomed. Bards debated whether it was punishment or metamorphic mercy, love preserved beyond human frailty. Back in Thebes, the necklace of Harmonia passed through generations like a slow poison, catalyzing ruin. Yet inscribed tablets of Cadmus's alphabet endured, traveling west to Greece and east with traders, anchoring human thought in letters rather than fleeting herald songs. Even today, when scholars analyze the first stitched alphabets of Phoenician-Greek hybridization, they credit Cadmus, the exile who followed a cow, slew a dragon, sowed warriors, loved a goddess, and built a city whose tragedies became theatre for all mankind. The pool that swallowed the serpent-bound lovers stood at the lip of Illyria like a pupil absorbing light, black, fathomless, rimmed by reeds whose tips bled copper each sunrise. Fisherfolk avoided it, claiming its surface offered mirages of futures that never came true. Yet on certain vernal dawns, when mountain thaw bulged rivers and frog choruses rang like cracked cymbals, villagers swore they saw two coils rise from the dark, one emerald, one umber, twined around each other in a patient spiral. No hiss, no threat, just the hush that attends vows too ancient for speech. Then the water folded them inside again, as though the world blinked and decided the vision too heavy to hold. If Cadmus and Harmonia thought to escape story by shedding skin, they had underestimated how myth stalks its authors. Their very slither carved new etymologies. The Enchele tribe, people of the eel, saw in the serpents an omen that they too could molt old oppressions. Chief Mason, bone thin and spirit sharp, ventured to the pool with an offering of barley soaked in goat's blood. He addressed the rippling mirror. Great scaled ones, lend us the cunning of dragons and the harmony of the god's daughter. Our enemies, the Brygians, torch our granaries and scoff at our spears. For 3 nights wind shredded his prayers unanswered, but on the 4th, a fang the length of a man's thumb washed ashore, opaline, serrated. Meson bounded to an ash shaft and called it Drake and Dart. Armed with that token and the conviction it inspired, the Enchele raided Brygian strongholds. Victory unfolded not through brute marches, but through serpentine feints. A small squad slipping behind stockades, striking grain stores, gliding away before alarm took shape. Brygian chieftains woke to winter cupboards bare. They sued for parley. Enchele demanded tribute in iron and grazing rights. Thus, the first Illyrian confederacy coalesced, its banner a coiling double serpent cast in bronze. Cadmus and Harmonia, though silent in scales, had birthed the polity. Word of the serpent lords drifted back across the Adriatic on trader tongues. In Thebes, Tiresias, old even then, eyes white as sheeted statues, interpreted omens for King Pentheus, Cadmus's grandson now brittle with ascetic zeal. When a merchant spoke of Illyrian serpents who listened to blood-soaked barley, Tiresias stiffened. He recognized the cadence of Cadmus's destiny still unfolding. An unbroken song, he muttered, where rest was promised. Pentheus, hearing only serpents and blood, scoffed, preferring to battle Bacchic frenzy without ancestral counsel. But maidens at the Ismenian spring wove wreaths of reed in serpent spiral, remembering a founder who had dared bury dragon teeth and harvest men. Meanwhile, Harmonia felt the centuries swirl under her new skin like subterranean rivers. Immortal blood slowed serpentine time. Seasons ticked, but never tired her sinews. Yet her goddess heart missed rhythm of lyre strings, rustle of silk against thigh. One moon-tailored night, she slipped ashore in half-human guise. Waist upward, a woman draped in scale glittering shawl, below the coils. At a shepherd's fire, she heard a flute carved from eagle bone produce intervals, vaguely echoing the old Phoenician Cadmu. Sunrise mode Cadmus once sang. She guided the shepherd's fingers, adjusting holes, crafting new scale that bent minor sorrow into major resilience. By dawn, he woke convinced a dream goddess had taught him a melody. He called it the Illyrian Harmoniad, a tune that migrated along goat paths to Thrace and eventually to Chios, where it seeded the opening strain of Homeric hexameter. Cadmus, less eager for half-remembrance, kept to the pool's dim. Yet mortal affairs tugged even through water. A caravan seeking amber outran bandits and stumbled upon the marsh. Seeing serpent eyes glow under moon, they prostrated, offering a rope of electrum beads. Cadmus tasted the metal's salt spark and remembered smelting furnaces in newborn Thebes, remembered alphabets pressed into clay. He surfaced, coils dripping. Instead of devouring them, he traced in mud the shapes that had once spelled Aleph, Beta, Gamma under Tyrian hands. Caravan scribes etched copies, carrying them east where Anatolian guilds fused Phoenician glyph with local symbols, another branching route of what scholars millennia later would label the Ionic script. Thus, the alphabet outlived the man's bones, then outlived even the man's human form. But curses, like letters, travel. The necklace of Harmonia, origin of so much fracture, passed from Semele's ashes to her son Dionysus, who gifted it to mortal side conquests. Eventually, it reached Eurypyle, bribing her to send husband Amphiaraus to fatal war. Blood-spattered bronze links. Each new owner found love unspooling into betrayal. Some bards argue the jewel eventually rolled into Illyrian trade routes, seeking its original mistress. One dusk, a trader tossed a glittering torque into the marsh, spooked by its tendency to heat like fever on his neck. Fishers later found blackened kelp floating. Where the necklace met Harmonia again, no chronicles confirm, but stargazers noted a faint nova that season, as if some celestial clasp finally broke. Centuries wagged forward. Roman surveys labelled the serpent pool Palus Cadmea, draining part of it for roads. Workers reported 2 giant sheds of shedskin, translucent with an iridescent pattern like interlaced shields. They sent one to Rome. Senators displayed it in the forum until weather crumbled the delicate lattice. The other skin, left on site, petrified into limestone so exact in scaly relief that medieval masons quarrying for cathedral columns paused, struck by its uncanny geometry. Stone remembering a heartbeat. Meanwhile, Orpheus's music, a distant echo from Cadmus's broader family tragedies, travelled north. Dionysian cults travelling south into Illyria mingled the harmoniad, flute scale with Thracian lament, birthing funeral dirges, whose descending tetrachords now underpin Balkan folk songs. Every note was an unintended legacy of the man who sowed dragon teeth. Eventually time grew so long that gods mislaid memories. Yet on equinox nights, Balkan villagers still light twin candles at crossroads, naming them Cadmus and Harmony, and pour barley broth on soil. They swear the earth underfoot compresses slightly, as though some vast coil shifts in gratitude. Geologists measuring subsidence jokingly dub the effect serpent sigh, but admit the ground does dip incongruously each spring and autumn. What of Cadmus's spirit? Orphic philosophers taught that all souls coil and uncoil through lifetimes. They claimed Cadmus and Harmonia, after seasons of skinning the world's loneliness, were lifted by Zeus into Elysium in serpent guise, then resheathed in starlight as the constellation Draco entwined with Lyra, alphabetic lines linking to melody. On clear nights, one can draw an imaginary line from the dragon's tail to the brightest star in Lyra, Vega, and that line will point half a world away to where Thebes once stood. Astronomers call it coincidence. Poets call it the founder's ghost still aligning fate. In modern Thebes, archaeologists unearthed tablets bearing early Greek letters so sharp they could have been etched last week. One fragment lists livestock ties beside ideograms for shield and plough. Worlds of war and cultivation balanced in tidy ledger. The museum placard names the scribe unknown, but keen scholars note the ductus, the confident slant of Alpha's crossbar, unmistakably Phoenician master hand guiding a Greek apprentice. They imagine an aging Cadmus instructing a scribe before exile. Tilt the bar so it won't topple with time. The bar held. The city he left would later birth Sophocles and Pindar. Tragedies and odes all strung on his alphabet spine. Thus Cadmus's story resolves not in heroics trumpeted, nor in agency stripped by fate, but in echoes, phonemes, cultural nerve pulses, coordinate systems of myth. He began seeking a sister and ended husband to a dragon bride, father to a cursed dynasty, inadvertent engineer of writing's democratization. His victories birthed calamities. His calamities birthed literate civilization. In the kaleidoscope of Hellenic memory, he remains the hinge where Eastern script met Western tongue, where violent sewing bred both soldiers and syllables, where love coiled so tightly with war that they became indistinguishable scales on a single immortal hide. Stand by any Balkan marsh at dusk. Hush your phone. Let frog croaks fade. If wind slips just right, reeds will rustle in sibilants oddly like consonants, forming around vowels. Sh, desi, kul, primal rehearsal of letters. And if moon glimmers upon water, you may glimpse twin ripples kissing, parting, kissing again. Reminders that no exile is final, that stories shed skins yet endure, and that every alphabet you utter is haunted by a Phoenician prince who followed a cow, killed a dragon, and planted warriors that died so words could live. Bellerophon, rider of sky-forged fate. A dawn-cold wind prowled Corinth's battlements. The morning Hyginus, son of Glaucus, first opened his eyes. It carried the bitter scent of sea-water despite the citadel's inland perch, and when it rattled the bronze shutters of Queen Euripides' birthing chamber, the midwife shuddered, mumbling that Poseidon had come to claim the boy before he could even be washed. No divine hands appeared, yet the newborn flexed against the swaddling, as though something larger than limbs, some inner tide, were already urging him outward. Between the dusky down of his shoulders, the nurse saw a bruise mark strangely shaped like the tip of a feather. She spat thrice against evil, and bound a tiny coral charm to his wrist, but the mark remained, an omen she dared not name. Hyginus grew with the restlessness of a wild-caught colt. Before his speech fully formed, he escaped the palace nursery, toddling down lime-washed corridors to the echoing stables. There he pressed his cheek against the sweaty flanks of stallions twice his height and laughed whenever their gigantic hearts thundered beneath velvet skin. When grooms hauled him away, he returned again and again, until even the fiercest stallion, Stormeye, a grey notorious for biting, tamped its hooves and allowed the boy to plait its mane. At 6, he could vault a low paddock rail, landing sure-footed beside weanlings that would have trampled any other child. Stable hands began calling him Colassin Animos, the wind's own chastening, because when Hyginus appeared, the barn's whinnying racket quieted to a hush that felt like reverence or wariness. King Glaucus half marvelled, half worried. The boy's appetite, physical and mystical, was immense. Neither rhetoric lessons, nor temple drills, nor spear drills satisfied him long. He spent hours on the Megaron roof, studying constellations through a half-polished shard of obsidian, then raced downstairs to question the court astronomer. Why did the dolphin seem to leap into the lion's jaws only on nights when the harbour's tide pulsed fastest? Could stars govern salt water? The scholar, brow damp, muttered doubts, but Hyginus simply nodded, as if confirmation lay not in words, but in the tide already swirling through his thoughts. At 12, tragedy struck, as sudden as a hoof kick. One afternoon, Hyginus practiced javelin with Axion, an older cousin who disliked being outthrown by a child. When the younger boy's bronze tip nicked Axion's sleeve, Axion sneered, calling him Poseidon's bastard. Fury, deep, ancient, unreasoning, flared. Hyginus launched another cast meant merely to warn, but his arm, tuned by months of perfecting centaur lean throws, sent the javelin true. It pierced Axion's throat. Blood glugged over the stringy muscles. Eyes glazed. A cousin's life drained into palace dust. In an instant, the stable's hush turned to a courtroom's suffocating silence. By Corinthian law, Hyginus was polluted. The blood of kin cried for redress. King Glaucus pleaded that the killing was accidental. Yet the ephors insisted the boy must either die or exile until cleansed by another sovereign's mercy. In the chaos Euripides recalled when a priest once warned, "A son of Poseidon bears the god storm inside. Should storm meet insult, land will quake." She wept as her son fled before dawn, cloaked in a grey horse blanket, a stolen piebald colt beneath him. The wind that had prowled his birth now shoved him south, and with every lurch of hoof he felt his old name tear away like strips of sailcloth. Somewhere among olive terraces he rebaptized himself Bellerophon, arrow-piercing sky, for legend told of a cloud-cutting fortress by that name, and he meant to live in heights where insults could not reach. An exiled youth gravitates to courts that value daring above pedigree. Bellerophon found such a court in Tiryns, ruled by King Proetus, half-brother to his own father, and a man whose lion-skinned throne seemed less seat than trap. Proetus welcomed the horse-whispering wanderer, gifting him a bronze-shod spear. Yet it was the queen, Stheneboia, who first truly saw the newcomer, broad-shouldered, sea-eyed, hair wind-tangled. Desire took her like summer lightning. She offered him wine and a wax tablet of crude love poems. Bellerophon, remembering Axion's blood, recoiled. Humiliated desire fermented into venom. Stheneboia accused him of assault. Proetus dared no open execution. Zeus, God's guest right, he sealed a folded tablet with his signet and bade Bellerophon carry it to Iobates, king of far-off Lycia. The youth, eager for absolution, accepted. The wax hid a death warrant. "Slay the bearer of this message. His blood will wash my house clean." Between Argos and Lycia stretched leagues of grey sea and rumour. On one moon-glare night, his vessel skirted reefed headlands, struck by sudden silence, as if even waves paused to listen. And there, on black water, Bellerophon met an old priest named Phrontis. The priest, half mad, raved of a daughter stolen by pirates. Bellerophon vowed pursuit. In torrid dawn, he tracked the raiders to an inlet, boarded their deck like a foaming corona, and struck down the captain with a slash of borrowed blade. The priest's daughter, freed, blessed him with a ribbon embroidered with leaping dolphins. Bellerophon tied it round his sword, hilt, and the old man whispered, "Poseidon claims you still." Bellerophon reached Lycia a hero to strangers, bearing his own doom. Iobates read the tablet behind a veil of ceremony, face smoothing into mask-like hospitality. For 9 days he feasted his guest on honeyed wine and barley cakes, probing his skill. He saw no assassin, only a fever-bright youth brimming with restless potential, more formidable alive than dead. Yet the tablet's command pinned him. He devised a compromise. Send Bellerophon to kill the monster that had turned Lycia's plains into scream coals. The Chimera, child of Typhon and Echidna, born in the heart of volcanic Caria. Its lion maw exhaled a blue flame whose smoke clotted into rock. Goat head grew from its back, spitting napalm. Serpent tail writhed with venom. Shepherds sworn the monster's hooves left glass footprints. Iobates offered rich gifts if the youth succeeded, fatal honor if he failed. Either way, Proetus's dilemma solved. Bellerophon asked 3 days to prepare. He spent them beneath a fig tree older than any temple, studying ants march single file up its knotted bark. "Combat is pattern," he muttered. "Find the break." But no spear throw could outreach the Chimera's fire. On the third night a priestess of Athena arrived, as sudden as dew, bearing a golden bridle. "Seek Pegasus," she breathed, eyes silver with moon water. "Only morning's child can carry you above goat throat fire." Then she was gone. Pegasus, the skyfoal stallion, drank from the spring of Pyrene outside Corinth. Bellerophon travelled north by secret byways, sleeping little. At dawn of the fourth day, he reached Pyrene's pool. Mist curled off the water like half-shaped wings. Reading the hush, he knelt, bridle extended, and crooned the song his mother once sang over fretful foals. Time untethered. A whirl of air, a whomp of feather, and there he stood. Pegasus, coat star-speckled, hooves sparking quartz flecks, nostrils flaring ozone. One cautious step, wind fluted through fig leaves. Bellerophon did not lunge. He waited. The horse lowered its head. Bridle slid, bit clicked, oath bound. Returning to Lycia, man and steed cut figure eights through dawn's rose plumage. In Iobates' court, jaws dropped. Guest had outstripped doom again. Next morning, Pegasus launched from castle parapet directly into sulphur columns belched by the Chimera's grotto. Smoke turned pink as rising sun. The fight that followed carved itself into mountain legend. Lion jaws snapping at air gone too thin to support the beast's weight. Goat head spurting fireballs that fizzled short, serpent tail darting upward only to meet the downward slash of a dolphin-ribboned sword. The final stroke buried bronze through molten palate into the monster's heart, releasing a belch of blue fire that billowed around Pegasus, but left horse and rider unwithered, Athena's bridle still cool to the touch. Bellerophon returned dragging the Chimera's smouldering mane as proof. Euripides' awe warred with terror. He dispatched the hero again, against the Selimi warriors, against Amazons, each time hoping odds might reclaim the life guest right forbade him to take with bare hands. Each trial ended in impossible victory. Pegasus strafed hill forts, Bellerophon slinging stones that cracked shields, Amazons scattered like autumn leaves beneath hurricane downdrafts. Finally, the king sent assassins, Lycia's fiercest, by night. Pegasus whinnied warning, swords clashed, assassins fell. Iobates, cornered by the momentum of his own deceit, confessed Asthenoboia's false accusation. He offered his daughter Phileno in marriage, plus half his realm. Bellerophon accepted the bride and one stretch of coast, where surf tumbled sea glass shards. There he built a shrine honoring Pegasus, teaching island fishermen how to read gull flight for storm signs. Contentment might have settled, if hubris had not stirred. Pegasus's wings, after all, knew heights untouched. One cloudless noon, Bellerophon decided Olympus beckoned. He mounted and ascended into thin azure, higher than cranes, higher than thunderclouds, until the chamber of the gods shimmered ahead like mirage. Zeus gauged the approach, amused. He unleashed the gadfly. It pierced Pegasus's flank. Horse spasmed, rider slipped. For a heartbeat, Pegasus tried to right the fall. Then gravity won. Bellerophon plummeted, bronze greaves screaming against air. Poseidon spared his bones, letting him drop into a marsh whose soft mud cushioned impact, but the shock mangled his spine. Crippled, he crawled to Alion's lonely fields. Farmers built him a hut out of pity. Children brought goat's milk. He spent afternoons gazing skywards, mouth moving in silent dialogue with clouds. When thunderheads massed, he muttered, and the storm paths curved away, sparing barley. The villagers credited a broken stranger who once saddled a star. Days settled into a pattern of yearning. Every sunrise the crippled hero dragged himself to a limestone promontory, beyond Alion's last tilled row. The place where time-scented upland collapsed into marsh. He would brace his ruined back against a sun-warmed boulder, lift his blunted gaze to the wheeling heavens. and tracked the slow choreography of clouds exactly as he once tracked the chimera's flame arc. The villagers, rising to their labours, saw him there and whispered that the sky, feeling watched, often changed course. Anvil thunderheads split and drifted to sea, or frost-bearing cirrus unspooled into harmless lace. They brought him offerings, goat milk, coarse barley bread, a wad of honeycomb still pulsing with trapped sunlight, and left these in silence. He ate little, yet they found the bowls empty by dusk. One afternoon, a shepherd girl lingered. Her right arm, broken badly the month before, still hung in a sling. Bellerophon noticed the pallor of fever on her cheek and beckoned. She knelt, shy. He reached out, the hand that once clenched spears now tremoring, and rested 2 fingertips just above the bone knit. "Soon," he said, voice gravelled like water over shale. Nothing else. Yet that night the fever broke, and by next moonrise the girl swung her crook as though never wounded. From then on the villagers claimed the ruined warrior held a residual thread of Pegasus's pharmacy. Where his hand guided, infection drained. Bone remembered original shapes. News travelled the goat paths. Pilgrims trickled in. Spice traders with sand lung. Fishermen with eel-cut ankles. He healed some, turned away others with a slow shake, as though reading destinies in the throb of their injuries. "Not mine to mend," he said more than once, and those refused rarely took offence. His refusal felt less like dismissal than the verdict of tides. Years unreeled. His hair whitened the colour of distant breakers. Beard tangled like gull nests. Philonou, wife given by Euripides, died in childbirth long ago. Their infant had followed her. Bellerophon kept a small stone carved with her name near his pallet of reeds, touching it each dawn before hobbling to the promontory. Some mornings he talked to it in Mycenaean verse older than Lycia's tongue. No one eavesdropped. When he spoke that language, the air itself seemed to hush. The shrine to Pegasus remained on the Cretan bright shore he had once patrolled, now tended by Lycian youths, who never met the steed, but swore they saw white plumage dissolve into twilight whenever storms scudded past. They brought him reports. Iobates had died. The chimera's bones, half incinerated, had become pilgrimage, talismans. Stheneboia's falsehoods were legend now. The queen herself long since hurled from a sea cliff by remorse. Bellerophon listened but seldom reacted. Only when a boy recounted distant rumour that Pegasus still flew, now harnessed to Zeus's thunderbolts, did his cloud-drenched stare glisten. One frostbit winter, mildew crept through Eleon's grain stores, followed by rats carrying plague. The villagers pleaded, would the sky-broken prince ask gods for mercy? He shook his head. Petitioning Olympus seemed folly after his fall. Instead, he spoke to the wind. They watched him shuffle into the marsh at dusk, leaning on a staff trimmed from the same fig tree under which he had met Athena's priestess. He planted the staff into brackish mud, binding around it the ribbon once tied near Pegasus's mane, faded now raven grey. Then, shivering, he knelt, hands submerged to wrists. The water glowed faintly as if dawn were trapped inside. By morning, a veil of mist hugged the village outskirts. Within it, rats staggered, lungs drowning in damp. Mould shriveled. Sun returned. Some called it miracle. He called it debt payment. Marsh answering mountain in equilibrium. After that, his hut became waypoint for scholars. A Milesian philosopher offered bronze coins stamped with Owl of Athena, if Bellerophon would explain atmospheric humours. The old hero pointed at the belly of a languid cloud. That one is a lion who lost his roar. Leave him be. The philosopher left perplexed. A Persian mage sought chimney updraft secrets. Bellerophon raised one eyebrow, scooped a handful of sand, let it funnel through fingers and said, "These grains know." The mage bowed, sometimes cryptic trumps erudite, but there were still nights he woke screaming, dreaming of the chimera's molten breath. Villagers learned to leave a clay jug of marsh water outside his door. If they found it emptied by sunrise, they knew the dreams had come and carried them into the next harvest as warning. Fire may die, but the memory of heat lingers. Then came Antigonus of Phrygia, scarred as scorched cedar, with 12 soldiers bearing shackles. He claimed to hunt a fugitive seer and demanded Bellerophon's loyalty. The villagers, remembering kindness, armed themselves with tools. Tension crackled. Bellerophon hobbled forward and asked the general to sit. He poured sour wine into 2 cups. His own hand shook so violently that half spilled. Antigonus, half amused, listened while the crippled man recounted a parable of a drowned sailor whose ghost navigated river mouths, guiding even foes to safety because water knew no anger. The general scoffed, but that night a gale splintered 2 of his ships against the marsh shoals. He left at dawn, soldiers silent, the seer unmolested. Word fluttered north, Alion's moorland Panachaea, guarded by a broken lion. Pilgrims increased. Some left cured, others died. The pattern birthed myths. Poets penned that Bellerophon had become a thin place, half man, half doorway, between sky and mire, deciding which side each plea belonged. He accepted this mantle without pride. On his promontory perch, he simply watched. One dusk a stranger arrived, grey cloak, hood up, leading a stallion whose hooves glimmered star-white even in swamp light. The stallion whickered, a note so pure Bellerophon's lungs froze. He tried to stand. Pain crushed him to knees. The stranger lowered his hood. Hermes, fleet-shod, eyes bright as mischief. Behind him, Pegasus bowed. The scar from Zeus's gadfly glistened like moonlit resin, but had healed. Hermes spoke. Thunder needs no rider now. Lightning steers itself. But the horse remembers balance, and he has come to pay. Pegasus knelt. Bellerophon, bones aching like snapped rigging, touched the mare's neck, softer than he'd remembered, warmer. Tears blurred the feathers into watercolour. Hermes offered a flat amber vial. Ichor of Nephili, cloud blood. One sip, and pain retreated like an ebb tide. Limbs straightened, spine uncoiled. Villagers watching from a distance claimed they saw old scars evaporate. Hermes extended bridle. One last circuit. Not Olympus, not hubris, just the horizon you never reached. Bellerophon mounted slowly, muscles reacquainting with saddler's curve. The feathered wings unfurled, spanning dusk. He looked back once, children by the marsh waving, hut exhaling smoke. Then Pegasus beat the air. They rose, not to God realm, but along the ribbon where sun rims earth. Colours poured under them, violet marsh, obsidian sea, coronas of cloud blazing gold. They flew until stars pricked through twilight, and constellations formed the map he once sketched on palace roofs. At zenith, he guided Pegasus into a slow roll, like a bow acknowledging audience, then banked east toward a newborn dawn. No one in Iliad saw return. They found his hut empty, fig staff planted by the pond, ribbon fluttering. On calm nights, villagers swear they glimpse a small star not catalogued by sages, pacing the ecliptic in leisurely arcs, never straying too near Olympus nor sinking below horizon. Astronomers call it Hipponus lantern. Sailors claim following its glimmer steers them clear of shoals, because its bearer knows where glass prints of monsters dwell. And in Corinth, Stable boys still braid manes, whispering a lullaby taught by a prince who could hush any stallion. They say if a foal bears a birthmark shaped like half a wing, you must show it the dusk sky and promise it that heights are real, but only if respect tempers zeal. The foal will stamp once, as if understanding, and grow into a charger fit for kings who choose earth yet dream of clouds. Thus the rider of sky-forged fate completes his last circuit. Earthborn, cloud-bound, mud-heeled, now horizon kept, bracket between hubris and humility, warning that ascent without reverence invites a gadfly's sting, but fall accepted with grace might yet guide storms into safer channels for those who walk where wings once failed. Lynceus. Eyes that read the veins of the world. The moon over Messenia was just tipping toward new when Arene laboured, and every midwife in Phyrae would swear until her own last breath that the flickering torch flames dimmed the instant the child's head appeared. What few noticed, except perhaps the slave girl who held the water basin, was that the darkness felt deliberate, as if night itself bowed to the newborn's arrival. Then, the instant his eyelids peeled back, the torches roared bright again. Those eyes, lapis rings around pupils black as obsidian, seemed to command the flame's return, asking light to show itself without apology. They named him Lynceus, for the lynx that sees mice stirring under snowfall. By 10 days old, he followed moving lanterns across thick drapery. By his first birthday, he tracked kestrels circling 2 hills away, announcing their dives before wings tucked. His father, Gorgophone's son, believed the boy simply quick of mind. His mother knew the truth stretched farther. At night she tucked him beside the hearth and whispered careful prayers, fearing gods resentful of any mortal gifted sight that trespassed godly distance. Childhood unfolded under burnt umber skies and the hum of cicadas. Other boys learned to hurl javelins into straw men. Lynceus preferred scanning distant ridges, predicting whose sheep would crest first, which rider kicked up dust and therefore galloped fatigued stock. Once, during olive harvest, he stared at a cloudless horizon, then calmly guided pickers away from one row of trees. Hours later, a freak gust snapped a limb, crushing empty baskets where men would have stood. Rumour ran out from the grove faster than olive oil. The prince saw the wind before it chose its path. Edith arrived in Lynceus's 12th summer, barrel-shouldered, storm-laughing, wearing a newly forged spear like a second spine. The cousins bonded the way pine roots braid under shallow soil, hidden, unbreakable, yet destined to wrench rocks if pressured. They built a game called Echo Flint. One cousin hurled a pebble into olive leaves, while the other, eyes closed, tracked the rustle to point of rest. Idas could often guess. Lynceus never missed. In those moments Ida stared, half awed, half unsettled, at eyes that nested faraway worlds. By adolescence, Lynceus began mapping underground streams. He would kneel, palms to dry earth, gaze unfocused, then drive a copper stake. Diggers uncovered cold water within arm's depth every time. Farmers treated him as a travelling oracle, but he begged them keep silent. He felt a warning beneath each praise, a tension in the air like wool stretching against too many needles. Years later, the call of Jason's Argo drifted south. Idas, restless as always, clamoured to join. Lynceus agreed, seeking a horizon wide enough to match his sight. On departure day, the brothers, so poets called them, despite different sires, stood at stern while the cured pine hull shivered down the slipway. Lynceus traced every grain in the wood as though reading years of tree rings in a blink. He marked hidden faults, leaning to whisper to Argus where extra pegs might save lives. Argus, wide-eyed, quietly hammered them in. At sea, Lynceus became unofficial lookout. He sighted a shoal of dolphins guiding the ship past reefs. He warned of squalls while clouds still stacked innocently low. When Orpheus's lyre mingled with siren voices, Lynceus alone could keep eyes open. He studied the creatures' throats, noticing tension that betrayed pitch before sound left their lips, guiding rowers to plug ears a heartbeat sooner. Yet vision came at cost. Each night he dreamt in double exposure. Present deck, overlaid by some possible wreck, comrades blurred with skeletons half buried in sand. He woke sweating, unsure which image awaited sunrise. Medea, noticing hollowed cheeks, brewed poppy milk. He refused. Dimming sight even in sleep felt like abandoning watch. Upon return, fame slid over him like ill-fitting armor. Messenians called him Earth Reader. Lycians invited him to judge chariot races because he could spot axle wobble from stadium's far end. All the while, Idas's pride inflated. His spear storm-gouge winning boar hunts, heat, hearts, especially those of Phoebe and Hilera, Leucippid daughters. Lynceus too felt the tug. Hilera's laugh reminded him of goat bells across spring meadows, light yet anchoring. When Idas confessed love for Phoebe, Lynceus admitted his own for Hilera, and destiny's spindle clicked into place. Their abduction, Idas's impetuous scheme, Lynceus's reluctant complicity, set wheels toward tragedy. On the ride back from Sparta, Lynceus scanned every dust plume, marking Castor and Polydeuces' pursuit, long before Idas sensed threat. Could he have turned aside? Prophecy tightens blinds. Vision told him where pursuers would strike but not how to unweave the intent. On that meadow clash, Lynceus's arrow merely grazed Polydeuces, and a boxer's bronze-weighted fist crashed into his temple. He remembered ground whirling up, roots, sky, Hilera's scream. Then darkness. Only darkness did not last. He awoke hours later, bleeding and half blind, to find Idas dragging him from the field. Castor lay dead, Polydeuces wailing, Zeus's thunder already brewing. Lynceus's head throbbed. His famous eyes now flickered like lamps choking on oil. Yet he glimpsed something in Idas's gaze he'd never seen. Desperation bigger than any spear. The cousins fled, carrying guilt heavy enough to bend posture that once stood ruler straight. While Idas set off after the Ceryneian hind and his own doom, Lynceus convalesced in a stone loft, bandage muddied with poultices. Sight returned in shards. This corner clear, that lamp haloed strangely. During recovery, he renamed himself Myrmexcare, ant hand, patient, deliberate. He studied ants crawling beams, learning perseverance without storm. Hilera visited under veil. Her gentleness soothed, but shame scalded him more fiercely with each kindness. Then came news of Idas's death at hands of gods. Sorrow struck like another weighted glove, yet along with grief flickered clarity. Speed, strength, even sight alone could not wrestle fate. Something else must. Comprehension, humility, memory. Lynceus swore to shape the gift that once launched arrows into a lantern guiding lost souls. He began traveling incognito, staff in place of bow, eyes half-lidded so townsfolk would underestimate. In Elis, he diagnosed a granary's collapse risk by watching how sparrows nested in rafters. He convinced masons to shift tension beams, saving stores that winter. In Pylos, he taught fishermen to read cloud height against gull trajectories, reducing storm loss. Rumor of a grey-eyed wanderer who knew the inside of earth as well as its skin spread. but few linked him to the Messenian prince of previous tragedies. Years drifted like surf. King Opharius died. Cousin Idas's memory became cautionary barroom ballad. Lynceus travelled north to Delphi seeking final anchorage for his once restless sight. The Pythia greeted him without surprise. Eyes that tried to outrun prophecy now seek to see inside it. She tasked him with mapping underground springs across drought-struck Boeotia, scribal work that would knit villages to water and memory to repentance. Lynceus accepted. Armed with iron stylus and papyrus, he followed olive root veins, hammering stakes where waters whispered. He labelled each Phreacaris, well of grace. One evening, as he charted Phocis foothills, thunder echoed familiar yet distant. Stars winked between clouds. He realized vision had sharpened again, but toned by patience. Details glowed without overwhelming. He felt no triumph, only quiet readiness. Eyes and earth finally in accord. And so, Lynceus's second life began. Guiding, warning, teaching. Weaving a legacy different from idols of bronze. When his walking staff at last splintered under age, he carved it into wedge stakes to mark 2 final wells at Messenia's border, returning gift to homeland bearing his first cry. Night he finished. He dreamed of Ida's smiling without sorrow, storm gouge now a ploughshare gleaming with ripe barley. And in that sleep, he did not see alternate deaths or fractured skies, only a field where every row ran straight, every seed drank water, and every horizon finally lay within kind reach of open, reconciled eyes. The map he carried began as 5 papyrus sheets stitched edge to edge with flax thread. But every time Lynceus traced a new rill or coaxed a village to sink a well, another panel unfurled like a silkworm's wing. Soon the parchment sweep stretched longer than a spear and heavier than the cloak that once bore Castor's blood. He refused ox-cart offers. The burden told his shoulders exactly how many people still thirsted for foresight. At night, he spread the chart beside cooking fires, weighed its corners with creek stones, and inked the day's discoveries by moon-grit glow, the fine black lines quivering not from his hands, but from the tremor of water he sensed flowing beneath distant hillsides. News of the water-seer preceded him. In drought-wrenched Boeotia, mothers pressed infants to rigid breasts and prayed over dust bowls. When Lynceus arrived, they parted like reeds, hope and skepticism braided in their eyes. He knelt, fanning fingertips across parched soil, then gazed ahead, not down, searching the slope for tiniest bend in juniper growth, a subtle droop of seed heads. Here, he murmured, driving a hawthorn peg. Water runs a spear's depth. Skeptics scoffed until 2 labourers struck the strata and cold burst upward, drenching shins with primordial generosity. The villagers called the spring Elpida, hope, and painted eye-glyphs on the new well rim to honour the man with sight that unlatched the earth. He refused coin, accepting instead a handful of barley seed or a spindle of dyed wool. Small things he could pass to the next hamlet. In each place, he left instructions carved into cedar planks. Mark wind patterns against crow flights. Observe ant hills after thunder. Above all, teach children to watch, rather than merely look. Looking is hunger, he told wide-eyed sons of shepherds. Watching is harvest. Within 3 years, a quiet caravan formed behind him. Apprentices who once herded goats or swept temple courts now carried reed pens and yard-length rulers. When campfires flared, Lynceus unrolled his growing map and let each student ink something he alone had verified. A limestone seep, an intermittent spring marked by frog song only in thaw. a subterranean echo traced by dropping pebbles into fissures. Beneath starlight, the parchment blossomed with inky rivers, wells, and dotted foresights. He called them the Clearsight School, though he never claimed mastery. "I borrow the world's lenses," he said. "The least I can do is return them polished." One winter, the school encamped at Tegea, where Spartan soldiers patrolled borders restless after war's exhaustion. A young hoplite named Alconius mocked the scholars. Maps could not feed garrisons, he jeered, and challenged Lynceus to prove worth by foretelling which of 3 stored grain silos harboured mould unseen. Lynceus watched sparrows landing atop the thatch. 2 flapped away instantly. The 3rd pecked before fleeing. He chose that silo, guided soldiers to breach it, and a sickly odour wafted from blackened kernels. Alconius accepted defeat, but asked to join the caravan. Within months, he sketched springs with the patience formerly reserved for spear-tip honing. Lynceus grew silver at the temples. A leftover ache from Polydeuces' blow sometimes rang behind his right eye, but the vision itself sharpened paradoxically, edges crisper, colours deeper, as though the wound had carved away film that once dulled perception. In late evenings, he wrote to Hilera, who remained in Sparta with children birthed after the peace pact, twins whose eyes, so rumour said, could already spot shells in surf. But Lynceus feared to return. Every league between them felt like atonement he dared not abbreviate. He sent the letters anyway, bound with thin gold wire, never sure if Tyndareus' loyal couriers delivered them or hid them under amphoria resentment. It was during a spring of low clouds that the Locrian embassy arrived. 3 grey-cloaked women bearing amphorae of spring water, the yearly tribute replacing their ancient maiden sacrifice. They sought the Clearsight's advice. Tremors cleaved the Opuntian marshes again. Might the water-seer mark safe resettlement zones? Lynceus's chest tightened. The blood debt of Ajax the Lesser rippled still, and Idas's name simmered in Locrian lullabies as cautionary thunder. Facing that shoreline meant threading 2 tragedies. Yet every map he inked was, in truth, a plea for reconciliation between land and its offenders. He accepted. The caravan crossed mountains where violet cyclamen carpeted thaw-wet slopes. Along the way, youths measured mineral taste differences in rills. Lynceus taught that limestone-sweet water often flows steady, but iron-bitter streams may vanish in heat. Near Opus, marshland reeds hissed in salt wind, and distant breakers flung white tatters that looked alarmingly like maiden veils. Locrian elders guided them to fissures belching egg-reek steam. Lynceus paced the fault lines, eyes half shut, feeling with souls each tremor's pulse. At a juncture, his sight pierced earth's rind. He swore he could see the water table shimmering in distant blackness like shield bronze. He directed ditch crews to carve overflow channels into abandoned clay beds. When high tide rolled next week, brine hissed but did not swallow the new fields. Locrian fishermen sprinkled barley on the water's edge, whispering that perhaps Athena's wrath had found a new course. That night, Lynceus walked alone to the cape, where the red cloak of Ajax was said to surface in storms. Moonstone light rippled across inky swells. He knelt, pressed fingertips to wet sand, and closed eyes. In darkness he saw 2 figures, Idas, cloakless, straining to lift Lynceus from dusty meadow. Polydeuces, fist raised then trembling with aftermath. He let the images settle until they no longer burned. When he rose, tide had etched twin grooves around his knees, like rings sealing an amphora. He whispered thanks to any listening gods for allowing him to see grief and not drown. The Clear Sight School's reputation now drew envoys from as far as Lesbos and Etruria. They established seasonal assemblies, gatherings where practitioners shared new observation codes, flutter speed of moths predicting dew point, glow intensity of summer swamps hinting at subterranean vents. At each assembly, Lynceus unrolled the master map, now a patchwork quilt of stitched parchments 15 paces wide. Apprentices lit oil lamps beneath translucent linen, so newcomers could see the veins, black for springs, blue for rivers, silver dust for aquifers, glimmering like a star map inverted on the ground. One evening after such an assembly, Alconius approached, brow furrowed. "Teacher," he said, "you speak of balance between watching and doing. But what if sight shows a coming harm you cannot divert?" Lynceus remembered his arrow grazing Polydeuces, Hilera's scream pinned under Spartan sky. He answered, "Then give warning and keep watch. Sometimes vision is not shield but herald. Even unheeded foreknowledge is lighter burden than silent regret." Alconius carved that into a plank, later founding a port colony library named Herald's Lantern. Age bent Lynceus's spine, but never dimmed irises. He felt the fade approaching when he stood before his master map, and could see both parchment and the memory of every place beneath each inkstroke, a double vision merging finally into single calm. He summoned his eldest apprentice, Myrin, and handed her the stylus, instructing her to add new roads wherever human need trace them. He asked only one personal favor: deliver a last letter to Hilera. Myrin sailed to Sparta, carrying both scroll and a small wooden box. She met Hilera in the citrus garden, where late fruit blushed amber even in winter. The letter spoke of unextinguished love, of nights Lynceus found comfort by imagining her reading clouds the way he read stone. The box held a crystal lens cut from island quartz, a tool he had never used, preferring naked eye. For their children, he wrote, that they might see far yet gently. Hilera wept, but when she looked through the lens, sunlight scattered into rainbows across citrus leaves, turning each trembling oval into stained glass. She whispered a promise to teach the twins to balance awe with vigilance. In Messenia, Lynceus felt his vision blur one dawn, the cliff line outside his tent doubling, then righting. He understood it was the world borrowing back the second sight it had once lent. He asked to be carried to the nearest well his school had founded. Apprentices lowered him onto sun-warmed stones. He traced the rim, smiling at carpentry grooves of long-dead students. He asked for a cup, drank once, and murmured, "Yes, still clear." Breath slipped out in a sigh so gentle, it might have been mistaken for breeze-skimming water. They buried him beneath twin cypress, whose roots intertwined like cousins forever. His grave marker bore no heroics, only a glyph of an eye above 3 wavy lines, and an inscription in small, clear letters. He saw, warned, and watched. The master map was folded, sealed in waxed linen, and installed in a shrine library near Tegea, accessible to any who offered proof of a newly charted spring or a tale of danger averted by observation. Years turned. Myrin's disciples carried lenses to the Hellespont, inked rivers of Thrace, repaired burst dikes in Lydia. The Clear Sight School became less one caravan and more a code of conduct taught along trade routes. Notice first, act second, boast never. Mothers told children Lynceus's eyes now orbited in the heavens as 2 pale stars low on southern horizon. Look for them before planting early wheat, they said. If the twins sparkle, water lies close enough to coax seeds. In distant Opus, the earth finally settled. On the cape, Villagers replaced fear rituals with the lantern race. Children had new moonlight clay lamps and sprint shore to shore, then set them afloat as tiny constellations to honour both speed and caution. No one references Ajax by name, but when the lamps bob seaward, elders touch palms and remember a man who ran too far, and another who looked too deep, and the grace that eventually bridged their fates. So Lynceus endures, not cast in bronze on war memorials, but whispered through artesian wells that continue to rise clear on drought days, through tide marsh cicadas, whose song farmers now interpret as rainfall mathematics, through maps that bear footnotes in dozens of hands, yet trace their lineage to one stylus. His story teaches that sight, like water, demands channeling. Let it stagnate and it drowns. Guide it, and it nourishes generations unseen. And somewhere on cloudless nights, if you still your breath by a well rim and stare into its depths, moonlight may split into twin reflections, one calm, one slightly brighter, reminding you that true vision never leaves the world. It merely changes guardians. Ajax the Lesser, swift blasphemy and the long pursuit of retribution. The salt marshes of Opus smelled of brine and peat, an odour that clung to skin the way rumours cling to kings. Ajax, son of Olympus, prince of the Locrians, breathed that scent from the moment he left the birthing room. Nurses would later swear he kicked free of the swaddling cloths before the midwife even tied the final knot, ankles thrashing as though the infant already raced league-long stretches across the tidelands. By 5, he outran greyhounds. By 10, he skimmed arrow fields so fast that fletchings blurred behind him. His father boasted that no spear launched by mortal hands could ever catch the boy. Ajax believed it, and began to think the creak of a bowstring was a kind of applause timed for his arrival. Other princes learned lyre fingerings and declension tables. Ajax mastered the mathematics of sprint, how each foot should touch soil no longer than the heart's half-beat, how to align hips so that air peeled aside in silent ribbons. He trained on beaches during low tide, lengthening his stride in wet sand until calves burned, then chased gulls up dunes for downhill bursts that blurred horizon and heartbeat. He laughed when challengers gasped behind him, not mocking so much as marvelling that human frames could be so slow. Temples kept a wary eye. Apollo's priest Hyginus observed the prince and muttered that perfect speed invites perfect hubris, which Apollo punishes. Olympus shrugged. Swift sons win wars. The queen, Euripides, tucked a small ivory figurine of Athena into her son's travel pack the day he first rode to Delphi. Speed draws envy, she warned. Ajax kissed her cheek and replied, "Then I will outrun envy too." At Delphi, the Pythia that season spoke in riddles about wings that are not wings and storms that walk on 2 legs. Ajax listened, but felt no tremor of premonition. He walked the sacred way so briskly that petitioners leaped aside, amphorae sloshing frankincense. In the forecourt, he challenged an Aetolian champion to a length of stadium race, wagering a gold clasp. Before the crowd's gasp ended, Ajax had crossed the bronze line, cloak snapping, sand barely disturbed where his feet had landed. The champion cursed, but the Locrian merely smiled, certain the gods loved a man who made the earth itself seem slow. Years slid by. Ajax perfected a short spear throw that began with a sprint, jerk, plant, release, and could pierce targets while his sandals still skimmed forward. He practiced leaping onto moving chariots, vaulting from rail to rail without touching the platform, a blur of scarlet cloak and whirling mantra, swifter, higher, untouchable. Locrian poets compared him to a hawk skating wind. He commissioned a buckler no wider than his forearm, perfect for deflecting but too small for hiding, because he feared any larger shield would slow his swing. When Agamemnon's call for Helen's rescue reached Opus, Ajax's heart beat faster than sailcloth snaps. He assembled 40 black-prowed ships, each crewed by Locrian youth, who had grown up eating oysters and chasing gull shadows. The prince promised they would be the first to graze Trojan sands and the last to quit them. His father blessed the fleet with sacrificed lambs, and his mother tucked the Athena figurine inside Ajax's cuirass, between linen and heartbeat. Aulis shimmered with warlust. Ajax disembarked, sandals flinging dust, and within an hour outran every challenger on the muster field, earning Achilles' raised brow and Odysseus's calculating grin. When Artemis stilled the winds, sailors muttered that gods tasted the army for insolence. Ajax disagreed. Why should the fleet wait on breezes when legs own swifter magic? He raced along the shore, laughing at gulls blown sideways, perhaps unaware that gods listen hardest to laughter that brushes arrogance. Finally, Calchas resolved the calm with Iphigenia's blood, sails bellied, and ships stabbed the Aegean. Ajax's Locrians drooped sailcloth at night just to see their prince dash deck length, bounding coil to coil. When Protesilaus leapt first at Troy and fell, Ajax marked the moment not with awe but calculation. Speed alone won't keep arrows off flesh. Timing must pair with cunning. In early skirmishes he proved cunning almost matched speed. He harried Trojan outriders, jabbing rear ranks, then vanishing like burst foam before spears could seek him. Achilles praised him, a shorter fiery mirror compared to Telamonian Ajax's iron tower. The nickname Little Ajax circulated, yet the Locrian never felt diminished. Swiftness was its own monument. During the dual truce he joined Helenus' games, sprinting barefoot on a beach whitened by bleached bone shards. He won by arm length, edged Achilles' cousin, stripped laurel branch from Officiant's hand before the judge finished victor. The crowd roared, but some older kings frowned. Speed so effortless seemed kin to theft. The wrath of Achilles left Greek morale wobbling. Ajax volunteered nightly raids, slithering behind Trojan patrols to slit sentries' throats. He boasted he could sprint across no man's land between volleys of arrows, and proved it. Shirtless, laughing as feathers hissed past ribs. When Hector torched the nearest ship, Ajax darted inside smoke pillars, herded flames with his cloak, and cleared a path for bucket chains as though he outran even fire. But after Achilles returned, wearing rage like new armor, the war tilted quickly toward its final night. Wooden horse accepted, cities lulled, and Greek iron hushed through sleeping corridors. Ajax followed Odysseus' squad into Athena's shrine, a small peristyle chamber where priests had barricaded sacred tapestries and girls chosen to weave them. Trojan Princess Cassandra clung to the wooden statue, hair wild, eyes bright with prophecy nobody wished to hear. Blood already smeared her forearm, where she'd fought a soldier's grip. Ajax saw only a prize fouled by Trojan dust. He barreled in, shoving aside companions slower than fury. Cassandra shrieked Athena's name. Ajax slapped her mouth and dragged her from the pedestal, knocking at least one tapestry from its altar peg. The statue lurched, eyes of polished jet glinting candlelight. Odysseus shouted warning, "Leave her, fool, God's watch." But Ajax heard only heartbeat thunder and the old mantra, untouchable, swifter than blame. He hauled Cassandra down the steps, across broken columns into the moonlit courtyard, where torches fanned violent shadows. Behind them, the statue toppled, shattering helm plume. Some Greek heard it crack. Some claimed the sound echoed like sky splitting. Cassandra, prophetic voice strangled by Ajax's fist in her hair, spat curses only gods could fully pass. Athena definitely passed them. Ajax heard nothing but his own triumphant breath. Ships crammed with loot rode for home. Storm clouds brewed thicker each dawn. Prophets muttered of sacrilege. Ajax, gold bracelets jingling on both wrists, dismissed it. What god begrudges spoils of war? Yet even hardened sailors crossed chests when a black-backed hawk circled the mast, the day they reached Cape Caphareus. Ajax watched the omen and smirked. Wings can never match feet. At sundown, lightning flayed the horizon. The gale rose so abrupt, rowers fumbled oars. Sheets snapped, hulls creaked. Ajax lashed himself to the mainmast, laughing that wind finally raced something worthy. When waves like mountains slammed the prow, the ship cracked. Crewmates screamed. Some prayed to Athena, others dived. Ajax, muscles corded, cut his lash straps and pushed 2 men onto a floating spar before leaping to another plank. His legs churned, treading foam whipped with shredded sail. Rain stung eyes, yet he kept stroke perfect, propelling himself across storm like a salmon fighting river cataract. Poseidon, some say, watched amused. Athena watched enraged. By morning, debris littered a reef. Ajax clung to a jagged rock jutting from maelstrom, hands bleeding. He shouted hoarse triumph. Even gods cannot drown speed. A moment later, thunder cracked, not from sky but from stone. The rock split. Surge rose, yanking foothold away. Ajax's eyes flashed surprise. Then water swallowed him. Witnesses in distant ships glimpsed red cloak vanish under white crest, like bloody sails sucked down a whirlpool. No body surfaced. Only a single olive wood figurine floated, Athena's image from Ajax's cuirass pocket. The goddess had not forgotten the mother's talisman. She merely changed its owner. The Locrian fleet limped home, sails sagging with grief. In Opus, Oileus rent garments, but Euripides said nothing. She walked to the shoreline, through pebbles hand-held since his boyhood, into surf one by one, each plink puncturing silence. She left the figurine unburied outside the temple of Athene Ilias. By dawn it was gone, claimed by priests for rites appeasing the wrong deity. Ajax's Locrians chastened, swore to send 2 maidens every year to Troy's rebuilt shrine, serving Athena as weaving acolytes in penance. They bound the girls with simple wool girdles, no jewels, no sandals, the opposite of spoils. Rumour held that whichever maiden attempted escape would be stoned. Thus the prince's swiftness became annual fear of 2 swift footsteps. Locrian mothers taught children to pray for steady pace, never fleet. Fishermen scolded gulls for flaunting speed. The land that birthed the swift sun inherited a legacy of measured caution. And beneath Ionian foam, some say, a red cloak sometimes appears in storm-riled eddies, whirling like a lost banner still racing currents no mortal legs could ever outrun. No tomb ever held him. Weeks after the wreck, Locrian divers searched gull-whitened reefs, hands raw from groping barnacle edges, but found only a splintered mast and a coil of crimson yarn snagged on coral. When they carried the yarn to Opus, Queen Euripides recognized it as hemthread from the cloak she herself had sewn for Ajax's first campaign. She wound the sodden fragment into a tight spiral, slipped it into a clay jar, and sealed it with beeswax, muttering that some remnants must never breathe air again, lest grief salt the harvest. yet grief salted the harvest all the same. That autumn barley heads blackened early, and flocks miscarried in droves. The oracle at Abai, mouth still bitter with laurel, declared Athena had not forgiven the violation of her shrine. Only lifelong penance would unclench her fist. The priests of Opus convened under cedar smoke and decreed a ritual unlike any performed before. Each year 2 maiden daughters of noble lines would sail to Troy, walk barefoot to Athena Ilias's ruined temple, and spend 1 full cycle of seasons spinning, weaving, and sweeping the precinct where Ajax had torn Cassandra from the statue's knees. When their term ended, new maidens would replace them, an unbroken thread of service long as the goddess required. Fugitives from duty, or anyone aiding them, would die by stones flung from the hands of their own kin, that the anger of heaven not flare wider. The first selection fell on Dorip and Cleomash, cousins scarcely 15, known more for chalk dust laughter than for any deep understanding of curses. They knelt before the city hearth, while the high priest clipped a lock of each girl's hair and twisted it into a flax cord to bind their waists. Unadorned linen tunics replaced the bangled gowns of childhood festivals. Mothers shivered, but no tear lines blurred. Public weeping risked hinting at rebellion. At dawn, the girls boarded a single-masted cutter as still as grave ships. Oars dipped without drumbeat. From shore, you would have sworn neither maid turned her head. Yet fishermen later whispered they saw Dorip glance back just once, eyes wide, not in fear, but in wonder at how quickly distance erases footprints. Crossing the Aegean, they recited lines drilled by temple scribes. Walk straight, speak little, sleep inside the cellar doorway, keep yarn taut, keep humility tauter. Troy, now mostly ash and memory, greeted them with grass-stabbed avenues where palaces had risen. Only Athena's columns stood semi-whole, as if the goddess had frozen her own ruin for inspection. Within that roofless chamber, they swept wind-heaped sand, plucked thistles, mended spider-torn linen veils. Nights hummed with insects instead of lyres. Sometimes they thought they heard footsteps, Cassandra perhaps, still circling an invisible pedestal. On moonless evenings, Dorip whispered that she mapped each starless patch of sky, so as never to forget how dark penance could stretch. Cleomash saved crumbs of sacrificial bread to feed mice, believing mercy might dilute wrath. Back in Opus, the passing of 1 year felt both iron long and arrow fast. New lots were cast. 2 fresh maidens chosen. A ship sailed out. Another returned bearing Dorip and Cleomash, pale but upright, eyes neither wild nor placid, carrying folded altar cloths they themselves had embroidered with olive branches. The city exhaled. Farmers found their barley tall again, but goats birthed stillings the next spring, and hail-stripped grape blossoms. Priests warned the rotation must continue. Gods test resolve by relaxing grip, then tightening. Decades braided into centuries. Generation after generation of Locrian daughters walked the Trojan plain, their bare souls hardening to leather on agate pebbles, their songs paired to half-whispered hymns. Some wove scenes of home onto temple cloaks, tidelands and marsh herons, without ever visiting those shores again. Others returned and married fishermen who felt honored to place calloused palms over palms that had once scrubbed goddess altars. But the fear of stones kept most obedient. Not all. One season, a maiden named Myrto, noted for sprinting along Opus sea walls almost as swift as the disgraced prince himself, refused embarkation. She fled into fir-shadowed hills. Search parties chased her through ravines breathless with time. 3 nights later they found her at a coastal cave, ankles gashed, gaze fierce as cliff lightning. She pleaded that Locrian women had given enough, that Athena must be sated. Priests shook heads, villagers hefted stones. Myth would later claim Myrto leapt from the cliff before the first rock flew, choosing the sea over public blood. Either way, her death fanned dread, and no second revolt kindled for nearly another century. All the while, the story of Ajax the Lesser changed shape in distant mouths. In Athens, dramatists cast him as cautionary Gust, a man who outran every arrow but his own arrogance. In Ephesus, temple artisans painted Cassandrean scenes, Cassandra clinging to Athena's statue, Ajax dragging her by hair, eyes blazing with mistaken righteousness. Pilgrims left spindle whorls at these paintings, small tokens begging the goddess to spare their weaving daughters from Locrian fate. Then came the great Locrian earthshake, a tremor that split coastal marshes, swallowed 2 barley villages, and sent sulphur stench spuming from crags. Seers argued both sides. Some insisted Athena's hunger had grown. Others believed she signalled that Penance's cup brimmed at last. The Council of Opus dispatched emissaries to Delphi. The Pythia, draped in serpent smoke, answered cryptically, "The long race nears its baked clay turn. Offer the runner water, not rains." Council debated meaning while aftershocks rattled wine cups. A young priestess, Philonica, herself once a maiden envoy to Troy, offered interpretation. Water quenches thirst, rains restrain. The goddess, she claimed, wished remembrance, not perpetual bondage. Better to replace forced service with yearly libation poured into Trojan soil, acknowledging guilt without chaining fresh feet. Elders balked, tradition is marble, yet Philonae reminded them, even marble erodes under brine. At last, they voted by lamb-bone tally. The penance would change course. That autumn the final 2 maidens set sail for Troy, accompanied by Philonica. Upon arrival, she addressed Athena's weather-worn statue, recounting every generation's service, naming each maiden, hundreds of syllables echoing column shadows. She poured bronze craters of opus water onto altar cracks until dust became mud. She pledged that henceforth Locrians would send no girls, but instead dispatch amphorae of their clearest spring water every year, so the goddess might cleanse memory rather than test sinew. Wind, hot as forge draft, curled through the chamber, extinguishing torches, then relighting them in a single breath. Philonica took that as assent. They returned to Opus bearing only empty jars silvery with mineral residue. Townsfolk braced for drought, plague, hail, any sign of divine descent. Instead, olive branches budded double. Fishermen hauled nets shimmering with mullet. A travelling geometer announced tides in Locrian marshes had levelled, salt content perfect for new oyster beds. Priests recorded these omens, then officially closed the registry of maiden sacrifices. But Athena, who never wastes a parable, ensured the lesson lingered longer than any mortal decree. On moonless nights, sailors rounding Cape Caphareus sometimes glimpsed a red cloak unfurling just below the surface. Not cloth perhaps, but a ripple of phosphor algae framed in the shape of a racing mantle. Those who saw it shortened sail and poured water overboard in silent offering, fearful of reefs. They called the vision Ajax's wake, proof that mortal hubris leaves tides unsettled generations beyond its single splash. Locrian storytellers began layering nuance into fireside recitals. In one version, Ajax still runs beneath the sea, legs pumping through tunnels of jade light, hunted by a bronze-winged owl with Athena's unblinking glare. In another, Cassandra's spirit walks the shore opposite him, her steps slow, deliberate, forever outpacing his reach, her voice no longer shrieking but singing, weaving tide and wind into lullabies for unquiet souls. Children listening learn two lessons at once. Swiftness without reverence courts undertow. Vows tempered by contrition can redirect the current. Centuries later, Roman colonists built a beacon near the old wreck site. Workers unearthing foundation stones found fragments, buckler rivets small as thumbs, a broken spear shaft, and a corroded bronze belt clasp shaped like twin wings. Local Greek guides advised leaving them undisturbed. The Romans, respectful in unfamiliar waters, embedded the relics in lighthouse mortar so that every flashing signal carried a glint of cautionary past. Scholars in Alexandria argued over whether Locrian maidens indeed served for 300 consecutive years, or whether the timeline compressed multiple disasters into single myth. Papyrus margins filled with conjecture. One scribe noted that Athena's forgiveness seemed less an endpoint than a negotiated détente, mortality shaking hands with divinity, but never fully letting go. In Opus itself, the old temple to Athena Kynosarodotos kept the clay jar Euripides had sealed generations back. No one dared unstop it. Yet during spring festivals, after rinsing altar steps with watered wine, priestesses touched the jar and recited, "May the swift find wisdom, may the wise remember swiftness." Then they danced a circle measured not in fleet circles, but in steady, deliberate paces, because faith, like earth-shake lines, stabilizes only when movements balance speed with stillness. Thus the name Ajax the Lesser travelled forward, not merely as a dash of arrogance dashed upon rock, but as a wake that shaped centuries of obedience, rebellion, adaptation. His fall proved that legs outrun arrows, but never outrun the orbit of deed and consequence. His city's long contrition proved that even gods who punish may tire of punishment if mortals learn to pour memory instead of blood. And on quiet nights, when the marsh reeds rustle under onshore breeze, Locrian boatmen swear they can hear the faint tread of footsteps racing across distant breakers, swift, tireless, fading before dawn. They whisper a brief prayer and row a little slower, letting the paddles ripple rather than slap, honoring both the thrill of speed and the pact of humility that followed in its foam.